Chapter 2. The Stick Man. They must have slept in the end. The next thing Jim heard was stamping heavy feet on the stairs and the rapping of a cane on the floor outside the door. "The Stick Man," whispered Emily. Before the children could sit up, the door was flung open and in strode the owner of the house, stamping snow off his boots. He swung off his cape, scattering snowflakes around the room. "I did knock," Mr. Spink barked, "but when lie-a-beds don't answer, then lie-a-beds must be got up." Emily and Lizzie scrambled to their feet. Jim would have crawled under the covers, but his sisters hauled him up. The children stood in a limp row in front of their mother. Mr. Spink pushed the damp, yellowy strings of hair behind his ears and peered over their heads at her. His breath came in little wheezing gasps. "Is she dead?" "No, sir, she ain't dead," said Emily. "Sick then?" "No, sir, she ain't sick neither." Jim looked at her in surprise. It seemed to him that his mother was very sick and had been sick for days. "Then if she ain't dead nor sick, what's she doing down there, lying under the covers? Hiding, is she, counting all their money?" Mr. Spink pushed the children out of the way. The children's mother had her eyes closed, though the lids fluttered slightly. In the daylight, Jim could see how pale she was. "Leave her, sir, she's tired out. She's been working that hard," said Emily. "She'll be off out to work again soon." Jim could tell by the way that her voice shook how afraid she was. "Well, if she's been working, she can pay her rent and we'll all be happy. Up you get, woman." With the silver tip of his stick, he lifted the rags clean away from her. "Where's your money, Mrs. Jarvis?" Mr. Spink thrust his cane under his arm and stood with his hands in his pocket, jingling the loose coins like little bells. He saw the purse bag on the floor and peered down at it. He leaned towards Jim. "I'm an old man and I don't bend. Pick that up for me, sonny." Jim bent down and picked it up. "Is it empty, sonny?" "Empty," he said as if he couldn't believe it. He saw the pie cloth in the hearth with the crumbs of pastry that the children had left. He stared back as if the sight of it amazed him. "Did you eat pie last night?" The girls were silent. "Did you, sonny?" "Yes," Jim whispered. "Was it a lovely meat pie, all hot and full of gravy?" "I don't know." Jim's throat was as tight as if he still had a piece of pastry stuck there. He looked at Emily and at Lizzie. He looked at his mother, white and quiet. "I bought it," he burst out. "It was Ma's last shilling, but I bought the pie." He heard Emily give out a little sigh beside him. Mr. Spink nodded. "No money?" And for a moment Jim thought he'd done the right thing telling him. Mr. Spink put out his sweaty hand and took the purse from him. He took out his silk handkerchief and flapped it open, wiped his hair and his face with it, and then had a good blow. "Oh dear," he said. He blew his nose long and hard. "No money, no rent." "No rent, no room, Mrs. Jarvis." "We've got nowhere else to go," Jim's mother whispered. "Ma," said Jim, "couldn't we go back to the cottage? I liked it there." Mr. Spink gave a shout of laughter. "Your cottage? When you came crawling to me 12 months ago, you was glad of this place, make no mistake about it. But if you like a cottage better, find your father and let him pay for one." Jim shook his head. His throat filled up again. "We're quite happy here," Jim's mother said. "Give us a little longer and we'll pay the rent." Mr. Spink flapped his handkerchief again and stuffed it in his pocket. "I've made up my mind, Mrs. Jarvis. I've a family who wants to move in here tonight. There's 8 of them. Don't they deserve a home? And what's more, they'll pay me for it." He swung his steaming cape back over his shoulders and strolled out of the room. And they listened in silence to the sound of his cane tap, tap, tapping on the floor outside the room. Jim watched with cold dread as his sisters moved slowly round the room, gathering up their belongings. "Get your horse, Jim," Emily said, indicating the wooden horse that Jim's father had carved him. "And Lizzie's boots. You might as well have them, they're too small for Lizzie." He picked them up. The The boots were too big for him to wear yet, but he folded his arms over them and stuck the wooden horse between them. The children stood by the doorway while Mrs. Jarvis tied her bonnet and fastened her shawl. She moved slowly and quietly, as if all her thoughts were wrapped up deep inside her, and she was afraid of breaking them. At last she was ready. The snow had stopped. The sunlight came watery through the window. "Ma," said Emily. Mrs. Jarvis looked down at her daughter. She was pale and strained. "I'm coming," she said. "But where can we go?" "I'll find us a home," her mother said. "Don't you worry."